Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Better Buildings Alliance Plug and Process Loads team webinar. I'm Dr. Kim Chunbath. I'm your host today. So let's just get started. Next slide, please. So throughout this webinar, at the end of this webinar, I'm going to open up the line for those of you who want to present some of your thoughts on how you're managing PPLs in your organization. So right now, everybody is muted, but towards the end, we'll give you the option to unmute. So at that time, if you would like to speak, I will prompt you to raise your hand and let you unmute your line. Just want to give you a heads up that that will be coming towards the end of the webinar. So the Plug and Process Loads team includes myself. I'm a lead at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and you can contact me at the contact information at the top. My team also includes my NREL colleagues, Amy Labar, Robin Tuttle, and Christy Maisha, who is an intern currently studying civil engineering at Vanderbilt University. Next slide. We have a great agenda today, so that's why I'm getting started as soon as possible. First, we'll have the BBA PPL team update, which I will give. We haven't talked for a while. Our last presentation was July 22nd, so we have a lot to cover. And then I have a guest speaker, Mr. Felipe Leon from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. He will talk about the integrated lighting campaign, where there is a category for PPLs and lighting. Our feature presentation is a technical presentation by Dr. Joy Pixley from the California Plug Loads Research Center. She's going to be talking about how your device energy usage patterns affect energy consumption. After Dr. Pixley's presentation, we have member updates. This is where we will ask you to raise your hand if you have any updates on things that you're thinking about with regards to PPL controls, and you can unmute and provide some comments. And then after the member updates, we are going to have a Q&A session. So at any time that you have a question, please type that into the chat. We're going to be compiling those, and I will facilitate the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Next slide. So I'm going to dig into the update from the PPL team. Again, we've been quite busy. We have a lot of new resources and research to talk to you about. Our last call was July 22nd. So since then, we've have some new things on our website. You can visit our website by the link that's in green at the top of this slide deck. And from that website, you can access recorded webinars, utility incentives, which, by the way, have just been updated. We have fact sheets such as those on plug load disaggregation and a new one on smart outlets. We also have case studies about findings from real field demonstrations for smart outlet technologies, as well as APS technologies. And then finally, we have guides for assessing and reducing plug loads. A picture of one of these guides is on the right-hand side of this slide. This is our one that's focused on retail buildings. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit more about the two guides on assessing and reducing plug and process loads. We have one for retail, which is down, the link is down at the bottom left, and the one for the office building is on the bottom right. So these guides are meant for building owners to help you figure out how to develop and implement a plug load strategy so that you can save energy and manage your plug loads. Here's some best practices from these guides, and they're in the different sections across the picture on this slide. The first one is to designate a PPL champion. This person is the person who's going to be in charge of leading the strategy development and the strategy implementation in your buildings to make sure that the PPL strategy gets communicated to all the stakeholders. The next best practice is to institutionalize PPL reduction practices. So this is formalizing and incorporating PPL energy saving tactics into your building policies. The third one is to establish the business case for PPL reduction. This is making sure that the business case will show your management that you're going to be saving energy, potentially money, and actually provide some asset management to some of the plug-in electric equipment that you have in your building. And then final best practice listed on the slide is to educate your employees on the benefits. And so this includes making sure that everybody is understanding of what you're doing with your PPL's management strategy or any engineering controls that you've implemented, so that everybody can proceed and act in a way that will encourage energy efficiency in your building. In these guides, we also have some strategies, more engineering strategies highlighted. They include smart outlets, or otherwise known as wireless meter and control systems, advanced power strips, automatic receptacle controls, and integrated controls. Next slide. So here's a blog that we wrote that corresponds to the retail fact sheet that I talked about, or the retail guide that I just talked about. And you can access this blog on the website below. Next. Over the summer, we published a paper in the ACEEE 2020 Summer Study Conference Proceedings. And this paper is called Emerging Technologies for Improved Plug Load Management Systems, Learning Behavior Algorithms, and Automatic and Dynamic Load Detection. There's a link to this paper from our website, but if you're interested in a more abbreviated version, we have a one-page fact sheet on our website, and the link is in the second bullet. The one-page fact sheet talks about these two technologies, learning behavior algorithms. These are technologies that use machine learning with your smart outlet to detect the behavior of the user of the plug load and adjust the controls according to user behavior. This technology is actually emerging in PLMs right now, plug load management systems, so you could purchase some of these smart outlets that already have this technology included. And then the automatic and dynamic load detection is making these PLMs, these plug load management systems, more plug and play, where you could plug your technology, plug your electronic device in anywhere in your building, and the system would automatically know what is plugged in and where it is located in the building. Next slide. So like I said before, we recently updated our utility incentive list. This is an Excel spreadsheet, and you can navigate to this by going to our website, going under Featured Solutions, and clicking on the link under Utility Incentives, and it'll pull down a Excel spreadsheet that looks like the picture at the top. In this Excel spreadsheet, you can sort your utility incentives by your incentive sponsor, the state, your type of incentive, and your PPL strategy. The pie chart at the bottom shows the percentage for each PPL strategy that makes up the utility incentives. So you can see that the large dark blue one is your appliance and kitchen equipment. We have 42% of the total utility incentives are listed under that strategy. We have about 500 incentives listed on this sheet from about 140 utilities. So please check it out. The last thing I want to say here is that we're going to be writing a Beat blog post about this soon that combines our analysis of the utility incentives for plug-in process loads with space conditioning. So that's going to be released soon. Next slide. Another thing that we're releasing soon on our Solutions Center website is the Smart Outlet fact sheet. So smart outlets are also known as wireless meter and control systems, and they are used for plug-in process loads. You can actually access this document right now from our NREL website, but we will be linking this document to the Solutions Center, our PPL website, very soon. And in this fact sheet, we really aim to helping building owners understand what smart outlets are, how can they use them, And then how are you able to procure them, and how do you maintain the benefits of them throughout the years? So it's really to help building owners understand smart outlets, and if they want, implement them into your buildings. Next. So this webinar is being recorded, and once we are done with the webinar, we'll be posting it on our PPL website. You can navigate to our webinar from our website, and on the there's a link in the first light blue box for viewing all the webinars. You can also navigate it from our Better Buildings on Demand webinar page. And on that, not only this webinar, but there'll be a bunch of other webinars that you can access, like the last one that we presented in July, which featured the state of Oregon and how they implemented a plug and process loads management strategy across all their state buildings. Next slide. So we have an upcoming PPL webinar. So this is one for March, and then we have another one coming up in May. Again, it's at 1 o'clock Eastern time and 11 o'clock Mountain time. And during this webinar, we'll be presenting on getting to net zero energy through strategic building operations and plug load management. Our guest presenters will be the Houston Advanced Research Center, and they'll talk about how they transitioned their LEED Platinum office building to becoming the first net zero energy certified office building in Texas. So please register at the below link. Next slide. And the last webinar that I want to talk about is an upcoming Better Buildings Summit. You can register today for the free Better Buildings Summit on May 17th through 20th. This is going to be virtual. Next slide. This is the update from the PPL team. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at ppl@nrel.gov, or you can put some questions in the chat. I'm pleased to introduce our first guest speaker, Mr. Felipe Leon. Felipe Leon is an electrical engineer with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory and is the lead for the Integrated Lighting Campaign. He has been with PNL since 2014, supporting advanced lighting and commercial building integration projects. I'll turn it over to you, Felipe. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Trenbath, and thank you for the opportunity to present. Next slide, please. I wanted to share with everyone about the Integrated Lighting Campaign, so I'm really happy to be here to give you some information and hopefully awareness about what we're doing and how this might benefit you. Next slide, please. So the Integrated Lighting Campaign, we launched last year. We launched at the Better Buildings Summit, and we're a program of Better Buildings that is designed to help building managers take advantage of energy savings opportunities. And we had a campaign that ran for 4 years that was focused primarily on the widgets, the LED lighting that was coming into many buildings, the controls for those, with lighting being a lot more controllable, dimmable, and how that benefited energy savings. As we transitioned from that prior campaign to this campaign, we looked at what was happening with lighting, and what's happening is that lighting is becoming a system, a part of a building system that is able to communicate with other building systems, and that can help enhance building performance, and it can save additional energy at the whole building energy level. So what is lighting doing? Some of these things that it's doing now is it's able to communicate occupancy information to HVAC and plug load systems. That can lead to information about a space's occupancy and allow you to turn off ventilation, set back your temperatures, and do other things that help you save energy. There's also advanced sensors and controls. We're going beyond occupancy and understanding more how spaces are occupied and how whole buildings are occupied throughout a day, right? So with this sensor data now being connected to a building system, we're able to understand our occupancy patterns in a building day by day. We're able to understand how many people are in a space, right? So there are advanced sensors and controls that allow for this. And with the advent of Internet of Things and the ability to create Bluetooth mesh networks and other mesh networks into lighting systems, we're able to do things that are now doing things like asset tracking, so you can find your equipment much quicker, in some cases with a benefit to a business. So there's a lot of exciting things going on in lighting, and we want the people to know about this. So the way the campaigns work is they provide relevant resources that can help inform projects that are considering these technologies. We also promote the use of innovative lighting sensors through our campaign, and we encourage that integration of lighting with other building systems, such as HVAC and plug loads. There's that direct energy savings, and there's also that benefit that can be quantified. And then we also help document and recognize integration. And we do this in two ways. One of them is through the recognition that we provide each year for participant supporters that join the campaign, as well as by creating case studies from those entries that we receive that tell us about the benefits that they've observed in their spaces. Next slide, please. I'll give you one brief example, and I'll let you look at this on the website. There's a link down at the bottom. But here's an example of Tinker Air Force Base. And this is a case study that we recently published on the website regarding an ESTCP project for the Department of Defense. And here we have a situation where lighting, plug load controls, and HVAC integration was all put together into a building. And you can see here that very quickly, lighting, as we see going from example from a fluorescent system to an LED system, we can have 69% savings with lighting and controls. In this case, the integral lighting controls were combining daylight and occupancy sensors, but it was also a network lighting control system. So it was communicating with the building automation system to provide that data to other systems. Now, when we see the benefits here to plug load controls relevant to this group, we can see that there was a 38% savings. Even though it was a limited evaluation, that saving was real. And through the research there, it was found that the majority of the plug load energy use was during off hours. So this tells you a lot about the potential that there is for saving in plug load controls, and also something where we have this energy use growing over the years as we start using many digital devices. Now, some of the things that were learned in there as it relates to plug load controls was that proactive device management might have achieved greater savings. And that's something that Kim mentioned earlier, is making sure that we communicate the right things to all the occupants so they understand how these systems operate. And then lastly, that HVAC integration created a savings of 26% at the whole building level. So that's very impressive for an HVAC system, which we know is a significant portion of a building's energy use. And here we see that also some of the learnings from that was that active coordination between contractors was critical to the success of that integration. So hopefully you can see here an example of what we're looking for. Many of you may already be doing this, so hopefully this information will be helpful to you. Next slide, please. So since we're interested in your projects, if you're a building owner, if you're a facility manager, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what it takes here. If you go to our website, I'll share that link here shortly. There's several ways that you can do that. You can go to our recognition menu item, and you can get right to our recognition entry form there. And we ask for a few basic things. There's also right on the front page, you'll see that our headline story right now is for you to submit for recognition. And what we've done is we are extending the deadline. We had it set to March 22nd recently, and we're going to extend it to March 29th to allow many of your projects to come in. So hopefully you'll get excited here about sharing about your project, about getting recognized by the Department of Energy, and letting us know what you've saved in terms of plug loads. Next slide, please. So what are the opportunities for participants? I already mentioned HVAC and plug loads. You can see that that's on here. If your lighting system is in some way informing either of these systems through the building automation system, for example, we want to know about it. There's also other integrated systems. If you're doing any kind of demand response, if you are doing asset tracking, or if you're doing a little bit of understanding of your space's utilization, these are all things that are informative to the campaign. So there's an ability to tell us about all the other integrations that you have going on, all the other advanced use of sensors and controls for your lighting system, and more. If we haven't thought of it, but there's something that your lighting system is doing that goes beyond the norm, please consider going to the campaign website. Next slide. Now, if you're on this call and you're not a building owner or facility manager, but you are, for example, utility and energy efficiency organization, there's opportunity for that. I'll share about that. But in either case, supporter or participant, the process is fairly simple. We ask for a project description, just a basic narrative about your project, about your lighting system and the benefits that it's providing to other systems, as well as the measured and perceived benefits. If you've got energy savings data, that is awesome. We'd love to hear about it. But if you have just some feedback, surveys that you've done, how people are responding to these more advanced systems, we also want to know, because there's a lot of non-energy benefits that are not being captured. So please share that with us too. Next slide. And here are the opportunities for supporters. As a utility program, you might have an incentive that is given to network lighting controls that are aligned with the ILC. We might have aggregate data that you can provide that says, hey, we save this much energy from network lighting control systems, and we incentivize this much money in terms of projects. We also appreciate the support of our supporters in helping us to recruit some of these projects. So if you've helped us to get some of these projects submitted or done outreach for the ILC, there's also opportunity for you to get recognized for that. So again, if you're a utility program, if you're an energy efficiency organization or an ESCO, please consider going to the website and getting recognized for your efforts. Next slide, please. So we have the website so you can stay up to date about what we do. You'll find reports in there and case studies. You'll find utility incentives. And we do provide a link to the incentive list that Dr. Trent Beth provided earlier. We have webinars and trainings that are linked there and videos that you can watch directly on our website. And the website is down at the bottom there for you. So please consider joining so that you can get our correspondence as well as to get technical assistance if you need it on considering some of these systems. Next slide. And I know that we have very little time today. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. My contact information is here. If you have a project you want to consider submitting, go ahead and send me something, or feel free to hit up our general integrated lighting campaign email right there, and we'll be happy to help you through the process. So thank you, Dr. Trent Beth. Appreciate the opportunity. Dr. Trent Beth, you may be on mute.
Yeah, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I just thank you, Felipe, for your presentation. And now I'm going to welcome Dr. Joy Pixley. Dr. Joy Pixley is the Research Director of the California Plug Load Research Center at the University of California, Irvine. She has an interdisciplinary background in the social sciences and more than 2 decades of experience in scientific research methods. At Cal Plug, she focuses on user behavior, how it affects the energy efficiency of plug load devices, and how to improve efficiency through better design, device design, feedback interventions, and control solutions. So now I'll turn it over to Dr. Pixley.
Hi, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that last presentation. It's going to be hard to follow that up. So as Kim just said, I'm the research director of CalPlug, and then we focus on promoting energy efficiency with plug load devices that fit how people really use these devices, the way that they work, live, and play. So we have a team of faculty, research staff, and students in a variety of disciplines looking at the intersection of technology and user behavior. And I'm really excited to show one of our research projects here today and to give a little bit of a hint of how that might be relevant for your buildings. Next slide, please. So I want to start with, for those of you who aren't as familiar with this, what is the plug load challenge? So we talk about plug loads as anything that plugs into your electrical outlets. So, you know, a lot of audio visual, office equipment to appliances. And the plug load challenge is that many of these devices are actually quite small. And so even if you are saving 10 to 20 to 30% energy, that's really not a lot for that tiny little device. But it adds up over the course of your entire building and over the course of your entire year. So there are 2 trends to be thinking about, and I feel sort of like I'm incentivizing you to go do what Kim was just talking about with all of these controls, all these training and how to take care of this in your building. But this is what our research shows, that on the one hand, there are more and more of these devices within each building over time. And as we become more efficient with other end uses like heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and lighting, the percentage of the waste in your building that is due to plug loads gets larger and larger. So it's a real problem. Now, luckily, many of these products are rated for efficiency, so you can find energy efficient devices to invest in, but that's only going to be the first step. So next slide, please. We're going to talk a lot about how to pick the correct device and how the behavior or the use profile of that device makes a difference. So what do I even mean by that? Let's start off by talking about what a standard energy estimate would be. So on the left side, we see one profile. So for instance, the Energy Star definition might be, it's going to be this many hours per day, and it's going to be at these settings. We're going to use that standardized profile and test a wide range of devices, different models and makes, to be able to compare them. And that's exactly what you want to do if you want to compare across devices. We're going to switch that around and say, for any particular device that you might have in your building, what are all the different ways that you could be using it, all the different use profiles, and how might that change your realized energy consumption in your building? Okay, next slide, please. So the first step is that we have to come up with these device use profiles for each device. And how do we do that? In our research project, we started off with 3 aspects of use of the device: the active use, the pattern of the use, and the power management of that device. And for each one of these, we come up with at least 3 levels, high, moderate, and low. So for instance, for active use, we're looking at the amount of time that you use it per day, or the number of times, like how many cups of coffee do you make per day. And as much as we could find data on this, we used observations of how much people use it in real life. So for instance, for televisions, the moderate amount is the median use per day, which is 5 hours per day. The low amount of active use is the 10th percentile, which is a half an hour per day. And the high is the 90th percentile, which is 13 hours per day of television watching. So for pattern of use, the low is all at once. The moderate is that same amount of active use divided into 2 periods. And the high is the same amount divided into 4 periods. And so there might be additional levels that are, well, what if there's 1 hour between versus the 5 hours between those different periods of use? And then power management is broken up into 2 different aspects. One of them, or 2 different parts. One of them is what the automated settings are. So would it automatically go to sleep after a certain period of time, or to standby, or some other low power mode? And the second part is how people are behaving toward it. Do they always turn it off when they're done using it? Do they leave it on? So for each of these, we have 27 different combinations of, if there's 3, low, moderate, and high. The standard setting, or the standard profile, I mean, is moderate for active, so that's the average amount of use. Low for pattern, that's all at one time you do that. And then moderate power management, which is whatever the default setting is when it comes out of the box. And then we had a lot of discussion about what would be the normal behavior toward that device, and we had to make some decisions about what the variety of different ways that people could use that device would be. So now we have that standard profile, and then we have all the other combinations of those aspects of those levels, and then those provide all of the profiles that we're going to compare to the standard. So what else do we have to do? We have to do a lot of testing of those individual devices. So we see how those devices behave over time. Do they have a startup period? Do they have a warm up or a cool down? How do they act if you leave them alone? And what's the power consumption at each of those device states and each of those transitions? And then we put all of that information into this energy modeling tool that we created specifically for this, called PL-SIM, Plug Load Simulator. And that takes the power consumption of each device state in transition, combined with the amount of time that it spends in each state in transition because of that profile, and it spits out the calculated energy consumption for a 24-hour period for each profile. We do that across all the profiles, across all the devices, and we have a lot of data. So how do we analyze that? We're looking at 2 different things. One of them is the range what kind of range do we get across all these profiles for the energy consumption, and how does that differ from the standard profile? And then what is causing that variation? Is it mostly because of differences in how much you're actively using that device, or is it also being driven by the pattern and the power management? Next slide, please. So this was specifically done on a study of residential devices, but a lot of these devices are used in commercial settings or have analogs to them. So we have audio-visual devices, we have computers, and we have a couple food kitchen appliances. Next slide, please. But I want you to think also about how, as we're talking about these kinds of results, how this might apply to the devices that you have in your building, how those devices might differ on how long they're being actively used and what pattern of use, is it all at one time or is it throughout the day? And then what kinds of power management options you have, what kind of power management settings you might have on those devices. Next slide, please. So we're going to start off with some graphs. These are the initial results that we get, the energy consumption across profiles. So the scale there is the watt hours for a 24-hour period, and we have one of these for each device. So I'm showing you two examples here. On the left side, we have the set-top box. And you can see that across all these different profiles, there's really not a lot of variation. They're all about the same all the way down. And you might think, well, that's good, right? Because that means that whatever my the standard profile is telling me, that what I'm expecting, I'm going to get what I paid for, right? I'm going to get around about the same as the standard profile. Yes, it's good, sort of in that sense, but also consider that what this means is that the device is not being responsive to your actual use of the device. So no matter how little you use the device, and no matter how aggressive your power management settings or behaviors are, you can't ever use less. So that's where that's not such a good idea. By comparison, if you look at the television on the side, you see that there's a lot of variation in those results across the different profiles. And I want to be clear that when we look later at the standard versus the high and the low, that it's not the case that most of them are there in the middle and you just have an outlier here and an outlier here, that they're really distributed across. And all of the other devices, except for set-top box, look more like this. So can you click the next button, please? So we're going to see where the standard is right there. And you can also see a fair amount, you can learn a fair amount about what's happening just by looking at this graph. So these are sorted by all of the ones that have low levels of activity, which is the half an hour, are at the top. And then those middle ones are moderate level of activity, or 5 hours. And then the bottom ones are high level of activity, or 13 hours. And you can already tell that the amount of active use is making a difference. You think this is going to be obvious, but this is not actually obvious for all of the different devices. But for each one of those, you also have that long spike. So can you click the next button, please? What are those long spikes? You can guess for a second. Yes, those are power management. That's when the power management is at the lowest. And so we can see by looking at this graph that even though active is an important aspect that's driving this, we can see that power management is a big problem. Okay, click on the next slide, please. So now let's go back and look at the standard usage profiles. This is all you would see if you had just the basic estimate of the standard profile for all of the devices, and you can see some variation. Click the next one, please. And now we're going to see what those ranges are. And obviously there's a big difference. So for those first couple ones, they're small ranges. We already saw the set-top box. And now we can see sort of what the real problem with the set-top box is, that it's fairly medium to high in terms of the standard amount of energy that's used, and you don't have any way of getting below that. By comparison, the soundbar and the streaming device also have very small ranges, but they're already very low use, so we're not really that worried about them. That middle group, we have devices where most of the profiles are higher. There's more profiles that are higher than the standard standard profile than there are that are lower. And that's a real problem case, because what that means is if you even just have one device in your building that is at that highest level, where there's the highest, the worst power management and the highest use, you would have to have several ones that were really aggressively controlling the power management in order to make up for that. And then we have on the last one over there is the most of the profiles are actually lower than the standard profile, and you would think that that would be a good idea, but it's not, because in this particular case, the reason is that those pod coffee makers showed up out of the box with all of their power management disabled. So there's only, you can only go up from there. So there's a good cautionary tale there to make sure that when you are installing that device for the first time, double check that user manual and make sure that that things are, you can't assume that things are already established. Next slide, please. So then we did a series of nested regression models to find out the percentage of that range that was due to these three different factors. So one thing that we notice, so each one of these devices has 3 bars, and those bars all add up to 100%. And the first thing we see is that those blue bars are all power management, and power management is clearly a problem. The green bars are active use, and that really varies across the different devices, and we're going to see one for pattern is important. So look at that first group, those 2 televisions. Those are a little unusual in that, in addition to having power management be very important, active use is almost as important compared to that second group where active use is, it's much less important than the power management. And then that third group of soundbar and pod coffee maker, where only power management is significant, and even though there's a little bit of active use there, it's not actually statistically significant. So why does that matter? That matters because if you see those really big ranges, if most of that range is due to power management, once we solve the power management problem, and we can solve those problems, that means that all that's left is the amount of range that's due to the active. So for something like the sound bar, where it's all power management, you've now solved the whole problem. Whereas something for the television, you solve the power management problem, you still have an active problem. You still want to be thinking about how much energy does this device use in active mode. Finally, in that fourth one, we have the rice cooker, and it's the only one that has a significant effect of pattern. So why would pattern even matter? The first reason that we thought of would be, well, if you have a delay time of how long it takes for the device to go into sleep mode after it's been left idle, if you have a long period and you have more, the more periods you have where it goes into that, the more energy it's going to use. And the second one is if you have a warm-up period, the more times you have to warm up that device, the more energy it's going to use. The rice cooker is sort of a warm-up situation, but also what we're going to call a load situation. And what this means is that the rice cooker uses a baseline amount of energy just to make a pot of rice. So that first cup uses a certain amount, and then there's this tiny incremental amount that is making the second cup or the third cup. So if you make 3 cups of rice first thing in the morning, even if you put it on warmer for the rest of the day, you're going to use a lot less energy than if you make 1 cup in the morning and then start all over again and make 1 cup in the lunch and all over again and make 1 cup at dinner. So think about this in terms of how many partial loads versus full loads, or partial capacity versus full capacity. Next slide, please. Okay, so now the question is, what do you do about this? And I kind of feel like I should just go, well, go look at those slides that Dr. Trenbath just showed you and go do that. But this will give you a little bit of a heads up on what kinds of things you would find if you went and did those procedures. So the first step is to identify what your device usage problems are, and then we're going to talk a little bit about choosing solutions and getting users on board. So the first thing to think about is that use does not necessarily equal waste. So I have 3 quick examples here of, on the top right, you have an information board video that's going to be showing the entire time, no matter who's in that waiting room, and that's use, right? We're not going to necessarily have any waste there as long as it's not on in the evenings and the weekends, as we just talked about with Felipe. The bottom right corner, this is a clear waste situation, because with a conference room, it's very easy, relatively speaking, to have a motion sensor, so you can tell whether there's anybody in there and turn everything off if it's empty. The one on the left is a little bit of an in-between situation. Do you have to have everything on in that lunchroom? If it's the middle, if nobody is there, that's a little more questionable. So you can go either way on that. Next slide, please. So we already talked a little bit about different ways of finding out what your usage problems are. So this is an example of the facility assessment checklist that NREL offers. I would highly recommend all of the things that we just talked about earlier. CalPlug also has this decision tree. It's just another example. It's kind of a different concept where we're looking conceptually at what kinds of things could cause waste and then what kinds of solutions you might have. Next slide, please. So there's a ton of different ways, and again, I'm just giving you the overall concepts here. So one thing that you can be thinking about while identifying these device use problems is thinking back to those aspects that I just talked about. So if you say, oh, well, this device is really using a lot of energy, but it's all active usage, well, I'm not going to tell you to stop using your device so much. I'm presuming that you are using it that much on purpose, but you could think about, well, is this a high consumption device given the type of device that I'm using? Would it be possible, is this an older device? Can I update it to a more energy efficient device? Is it in fact a new device with every possible bell and whistle and huge capacity, and I'm really only using a small amount? I could maybe downgrade. For power management, you want to be thinking about things like, are there long periods where the device is idle, where it's unused, where we could be, putting that into a low power mode. For pattern, it's a little bit harder. You can think about, okay, if it's going into a low power mode, can I get it there more quickly with a shorter delay period? If it has warm-up periods, would it be possible to maybe change the workflow around a little bit so there's one warm-up period and then more of the stuff happens right away, so it's not having to do it over and over? And then the load capacity that we just talked about earlier, if it's possible to hold off and only do full loads or full capacity, that might also save energy. But think also beyond the individual devices to this idea of your combination of devices. So if you have a large number of big devices that are only doing small things, you could maybe consolidate that and have a smaller number of big devices. Or we found, for instance, or we in the field found that there's all these little like mini fridges in people's offices. And this is an NREL study actually also, I think, mini fridges in people's offices. If instead you could have all of those things in one break room in a larger refrigerator, not only would you save energy, but you'd get your people to get up off their desks and go to their, walk around a little bit during the day, which is, it's a win-win healthy situation. Next slide, please. Next slide, there we go. So then now we have these solutions. The first one's a device level solution. This is pretty basic, find a better device, think about what your energy savings are going to be in terms of whether it's going to be cost effective for you. You can look at energy labels, you can look at these various online comparisons, and as we just talked about, your utility might have incentives through their energy efficiency programs. Go look at that database that we talked about earlier. Next slide. In order to figure out, the next level is the settings level. And in order to figure out whether you need better settings, you have to figure out where your bad settings are. So the classic way of doing that is to do this, walk through the building in the middle of the night and see like, wait a minute, what are all these things that are still on? That can work, but it also has some downsides in that a lot of devices do not make a lot of noise anymore or don't have any lights. If you do have any sort of energy assessments that you can have access to, that can give you a lot of ideas about which things are potentially have settings problems. And you can also check each individual device. So here are some various kinds of settings that you might be looking at. I would strongly recommend that you have people who are trained in doing this, because for instance, one of the studies that we did on computer power management shows that the average user does not understand what their settings are or whether their computer is even set to go to sleep. So it's not enough to just ask people, hey, don't worry, don't forget to do this. You need to have somebody to go in there and check those settings. Next click, please. And so even if you have the settings and these devices are going into low power mode, you still might have problems with what we call vampire load. And that is that it's sucking small amounts of energy for devices that are in soft off situations, or maybe they're in low power or standby, but that's still taking up a lot of energy. So I just love that vampire. Next slide, please. And the last level is the control level, and we just talked a lot about that. I wanted to just overall here that there's different levels that you can address this in. So if you have a small office or a small situation, you can do just points, points here and there, and solve those points with a couple individual control devices. And those can be smart plugs for major devices. They can be these individual control devices like advanced power strips, tier 1 and tier 2. A variety of different things you can do. You can have motion sensors, you can have timers. If you want to get a little bit fancier, you can look at these plug load control device systems that will control all of your plug loads. This particular one, for instance, is a software as a service platform. So that can be very effective. And then the next level up is this whole building management, where we were just talking about this with the integrated lighting campaign, that you're starting to integrate this in with control of lighting, control of HVAC, with these controlled outlets, and with the long-term dream being these completely integrated grid interactive efficient buildings that have also solar, also being able to respond to grid signals. Next slide. No matter what kind of controls you have, though, you do have to think about getting those users on board if you want long-term persistence on these. So what we normally have is owners and maybe facility managers are doing this top-down solution where they design things, they plan and they install it. If you're lucky, the facility manager are enabling the settings. If you're even luckier, they're actually monitoring them over time. But we do find that it's that second part that's the problem, where over the course of after these things have been installed, somebody will get a new device and they'll unplug these things and reinstall them, and they're not necessarily using them very effectively. Or the maintenance person will see that there's this weird plug there, they'll unplug it to put the vacuum cleaner in, and they won't necessarily plug it back in again. We have a lot of cases with people who are disabling settings. For instance, the IT managers are happy to disable all of your computer power management in case that's potentially a problem. So you really do have to have these people on board for any of these kinds of solutions. So next slide, please. And this itself should be an entire webinar. How do you inform and engage your users? And I'm just going to mention a couple different types of approaches. The easiest is to have a series of prompts or reminders, reminding people very specifically what kinds of behaviors they could be doing, concrete things that to get their ideas because they don't necessarily know. Just save energy might not help, and then maybe like little stickers like please don't unplug me, I'm saving energy, things like that. Gamification is about the idea that you're giving them rewards, you're making it fun to save energy, maybe either just a video game that they're playing themselves, or perhaps they are competing like my floor versus your floor, who's going to save more energy. That's a pro and con situation. On the one hand, if you're counting on that to get their motivation, as soon as they stop playing the game, they lose the motivation, and you might not see the energy savings after that. But if the game is then teaching them how to save energy in ways that they didn't know, or it's teaching them, hey, I could just set these, I could set these delays and it's really not that much of a big deal, you kind of get them into the habit, and then you do have longer term persistence. And then finally, the last one there is user feedback, and the idea there is that you're giving individual users feedback on how well they're doing. So in this particular case, this is the power management user interface that my team developed to try to convince people to be more efficient with their computers. And you get a smiley face if your computer spends very little time idle, and you get a sad face if it spends a lot of time idle. And I tell you, in our experiment, people did not like to see that sad face. They were very motivated to see that smiley face and to be more efficient. So click the next one then, please. Next slide. There we go. So yeah, so that just to sum it up, the idea is, yes, you should buy energy efficient devices, but that's only the first step. You really want to be looking at how those devices are being used, how all of the devices in your building are being used in terms of the pattern, especially in terms of the power management, and look for new ways to engage and motivate your users if you really want to maximize your savings. And I feel like we should go back to those earlier slides that we were looking at. Go click on all those links that Dr. Trinbeth showed you. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pixley. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great, great. Okay, wonderful. So if you have questions for Dr. Pixley or Mr. Leone, please type them into the chat and we will get to them in a few minutes. But at this time, I want to take volunteers to come in and share an update on what you've been doing for plug load controls in your buildings, or if you have any questions or challenges that you're coming across. So at this point, if you are interested in sharing your update, please raise your hand and I will call on you and give you the option to unmute. So to raise your hand, select the green hand icon from the GoToWebinar panel. And once I call on you, you can unmute your line by selecting the microphone icon. And let's see, you will know these actions are successful when your icons have turned green. So we do have one update from Lauren Fitch from Iron Mountain. She's an energy manager with CBRE for the Iron Mountain account. So I will turn it over to Lauren.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Lauren.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Trenbeth. Hello, as Kim shared, my name is Lauren Fitch. I work with CBRE and am a dedicated energy manager with Iron Mountain. Just to give a little bit of an overview of Iron Mountain, Iron Mountain's a global business dedicated to storing, protecting, and managing information and assets for their clients. Iron Mountain has around over 1,400 facilities across the globe, with approximately 50% of those facilities residing in North America. And so Iron Mountain has public environmental goals, RE100 and science-based target initiatives. So our core focus, one of the core focus areas is with energy efficiency. So specifically, we've really focused on kind of your typical energy efficiency projects, such as LED conversions, and recently kind of focused on HVAC optimization. However, with that said, recognizing that a majority of Iron Mountain facilities are kind of your typical record storage, so think warehouses, their main energy consumption really lies in those two key areas, but it really leaves an opportunity for plug load management kind of as that final frontier for energy savings to look at continuing to find ways to automate more efficiency energy consumption, as well as kind of identifying unused equipment, optimizing floor space, and in some instances, even kind of identifying safety hazards. So back in the fall of last year, we actually had a call with Kim and the NREL team, and they really kind of opened our eyes to where the opportunities are and guided us to those key informative resources that were shared at the beginning of the call to basically be kind of a starting point as we kickstarted the analysis for a plug load management solution for Iron Mountain. So since the call that we had back in the fall, we basically wanted to look at how we could see how it's a good plug load management's a good fit for Iron Mountain. So we wanted to do a pilot since we don't have a typical office facility that most of the times we see plug load be a really good fit for. So we identified 2 possible vendors and several locations that are typical of the larger portfolio. And we're doing the pilot to basically determine kind of the best fit for a larger rollout for the facility, and using that pilot to identify kind of key criteria. So looking at survey process, the install process, how the equipment integrates with the employees. So kind of what was noted just a few minutes ago. So how's that employee engagement connection, looking at if the vendors offer customer support and how secure it is, and kind of those key pieces that make for a really successful rollout. So that's kind of where we stand now. But I just want to basically say that if you're looking to just kickstart and you're just trying to starting somewhere, definitely work with Dr. Trenbath and her team. They've guided us in the beginning to help us align with where our goals should be and resources to use. So I would definitely recommend starting there. So thank you for letting me give an update.
Thanks, Lauren. I greatly appreciate it, and thanks for the shout out. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences, because I think it's really important for building owners to share with each other. And so if you're a building owner and you're interested in kind of collaborating with others, please feel free to reach out to us at ppl@nrel.gov, and we will connect with the sector leads from the BBA to make sure that we can get everybody in potentially in collaboration groups, so we can facilitate that. So at this time we have 5 minutes remaining, and I do want to get to a few questions. So let's see, next slide. Well, I guess, okay, so here I do have some questions that got set into the chat, and I have questions for both Dr. Pixley and Mr. Leon. So I think I'll welcome them back up, and you guys can unmute yourself. And the first question is, does the new lighting used in modern architecture, and sorry, let me take a minute. You know what, I'll give a question for Dr. Pixley first. Give a heads up, I was just starting to ask the question. So this is for Dr. Pixley. Does the new lighting used in modern architecture art about interior design include in, hold on, I need a second to read this. Sorry. Okay, so actually I'm going to start with a question for Felipe. So is there any cost to joining the campaign or submitting a project? Felipe, you are on mute.
Yes. Remember to put your mic down when you're not muted. Thank you for that question, Kim, Dr. Trunbath. The campaign is a free resource to everyone, so I encourage you to not just join the campaign and leverage those resources, but also to go ahead and submit your project to be recognized for it. So it's great to be recognized by the Department of Energy, but it's also great to be able to share with others the great things that you're doing in your buildings. So thank you.
Great, thank you. The next one is for Dr. Joy Pixley. So this is specifically about projectors. So what do you think dictates power use of projectors? And this was like going back to the categories: active power management, pattern of use, or amount.
Well, that's a great question. We did some work looking at how projectors were used in schools, and what we find is that every day when it's working the way it's supposed to, then it's active use is what is driving it. But all you need to do is mess up the power management once. You forget to turn it off when it's done, and it's on all evening, it's on all weekend, and suddenly you have a very serious power management problem. So what we find over and over with these devices is that if the power management is messed up, that just overwhelms everything else, particularly in the commercial sector, because all you need to do is miss it once and it goes all the way overnight, and that just overwhelms any other slight difference you have with something else, or particularly if it's all over the weekend. And that's what we find with projectors. Now, the newer projectors all have power management built in, so as long as you don't disable it, you're okay. But a lot of schools in particular don't have the funds to completely renovate all of those. So we're looking at control solutions that they can use in the meantime.
Great, thank you. I have one more question for Dr. Pixley. Kind of a comment with a question attached. Because of the pandemic, all of the academic teaching and studying that's going online, this means that researchers and students are going to use their PC, their mobile devices, their printer more than 3 times a day. Can you comment on that?
They're using them a lot during the day. So what we see in general, and I did a study for LADWP looking at the effects of COVID-19 and the stay-at-home on energy use in residential versus commercial. And what we see is that there's a slight decrease in commercial and a much larger increase per household for residential units. And that is because you are at home all day. You're not necessarily using the computer more, you're just using your home computer as opposed to your office computer. So what you would do there is, instead of going from active very low at home, you'd be going to active very high at home. And in terms of the power management, I don't actually know if you would be spending a lot more energy on it. It depends on whether your power management was effective to begin with. So we know, for instance, that a lot of people don't have their power management enabled. If your power management isn't enabled on your computer, you might as well be using it 10 hours a day, because otherwise it's still being used the whole time. So if your computer was going to sleep after a half an hour every time, then you are going to be using more energy at home, yes.
Great, thank you. And that's all the time that we have for questions. This is my last slide. It's being displayed here. We would love to hear from you, so let us know if you're thinking of any PPL strategies. Email us at ppl@nral.gov. And if you have any ideas of what resources you would like to see, also let us know. And again, our website is this last link. And I'm going to wrap up here. I want to thank everyone for being part of the call. I want to wish everyone the best of luck, especially as we continue to get through this pandemic. And I look forward to seeing all of you on our next call, which will be in May. Thanks, everyone, and have a good rest of the week.